Hello and welcome to another episode of RECAP Ethiopia, your number one source for a summary of events in Ethiopia over any given week. In this week's episode of the show, more updates on the ensuing conflict in the Tigray region will be given, raising key decisions from both camps over the past week, the growing humanitarian situation in the country, and legal discussions surrounding the nature of the conflict will also be talked on. In addition, the decision by the Ethiopian Tea and Coffee Authority to update export rules on coffee, Ayele Solomon's and B Divine's victory on Shark Tank with a beverage inspired by the Ethiopian traditional drink, and the show of support to the Ethiopian Military on the past Tuesday will also be discussed in this week's episode of RECAP Ethiopia. So stay tuned and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to get more of RECAP Ethiopia and other shows coming on Addis, Zeybe. I'm Wangil Tamene, and this is RECAP Ethiopia. One of the major developments in the country came from the Ethiopian Tea and Coffee Authority as it announced that in an effort to increase exports and foreign exchange, it will allow grade 5 and under grade coffee beans to be exported. The authority also said that exporters will also be able to export coffee beans without necessarily going through the ECX, which had monopolized exported agricultural goods thus far. The decision replaces the rules surrounding the export of coffee beans previously, which only allowed grade 1 to 4 coffee beans to be exported. According to the authority, it will be granting export permits on an annual basis, as well as delegating regional authorities with the power to grant permits to farmers with at least 2 hectares of land. The authority plans to raise $1.7 billion from the export of 312,000 tons of coffee this year, in contrast to the 271,000 tons of exported coffee, which generated $854 million. Coffee accounts to over 1/4 of the country's export revenue. As the conflict in the Tigray region continues, on Tuesday, November 17, 2020, Ethiopians in the capital and other parts of the country expressed their support to the Ethiopian military forces under the motto, "I stand with my national defense forces." The Ethiopian national flag was flown from buildings and cars. Scenes of residents of Addis Ababa on the streets of Addis Ababa clapping their hands and patriotic songs blasting from speakers were seen on Tuesday as the legitimacy of the current conflict rages on. The Prime Minister called on the country to participate in this event via his social media accounts, calling on the people of Ethiopia to observe 1 minute of silence and 1 minute of clapping for the National Defense Forces on Tuesday, November 17 at 11:30 a.m. Some have speculated that this could help Abiy Ahmed's administration salvage legitimacy from the international community, while others took on social media to celebrate the work being done by the Ethiopian Defense Forces. The event was one in line with the different initiatives to raise funds and support to the Ethiopian military. This week also brought with it a victory for Ethiopian-born American entrepreneur Ayele Solomon in the famous American TV show, The Shark Tank. Ayele's idea was pitched to the sharks this past week, showcasing the famous Ethiopian beverage to the international community. Ayele's idea is a Dutch-inspired line of wines ranging between the price margin of $28 and $348, called B Divine. Ayele went on the show, aired on ABC on Friday, November 13, 2020, winning an investment of $750,000 from 4 of the 5 judges on the panel the show for a 40% share in the company. High price tags of the wine bottles produced by B Divine were identified as a problem in the beginning parts of Ayele's speech, with veteran businessman and shark Kevin O'Leary stating that because 97% of wine in America is sold under $15, making an investment from him was impossible. However, Ayele came out a winner as Lori Grainer, Robert Herjavec, Mark Cuban, and Daniel Lubitsky, each of whom are proven businessmen and women worth more than $5.7 billion. One of the investors, Robert Herjavec, tweeted the following after the pitch by Ayele, saying that, "It's not wine, it's not mead, it's a be divine. Look at this beautiful presentation. No wonder I was so impressed when they entered the tank. If you love honey wine, check them out." Be Divine tweeted its delight for securing the investment of $750,000 on Tuesday, November 17, 2020, saying, "Thank you to ABC, all the sharks, and everyone who watched our fearless winemaker honor getting a sparkling deal at Shark Tank ABC on Friday. For those who sent us a message or ordered wine from our website, don't worry, we've stopped celebrating and are working on it. Cheers." Ayele's Dutch-inspired white wine has been gaining a lot of momentum because of its sweet taste and its contribution to the environment by driving the message of saving bees home. Some of the reactions to the victory on the ABC television show include Sofanit M, who appreciated the cultural contribution by Ayele in her tweet that read, "Well done, Solomon, reintroducing Ethiopian plus 700 years old Dutch honey wine on a global scale." Theodros Fikramariam, on the other hand, congratulated the 4 judges that chose to invest in Ayele's idea, tweeting, "You just hit a jackpot with Be Divine. Ethiopian honey wine, we call it Dutch, has a huge potential. Products from Ethiopia are an untapped market. From date to honey wine, when people have taste, they fall in love with it." Another week has passed since the conflict broke out in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, with the Ethiopian military, the Amhara Regional State Special Forces and militia, as well as Eritrean forces allegedly being on one side and the Tigray Regional State Special Forces and militia on the other. The conflict in the north is still raging on, with much of the information coming out of both camps resembling propaganda by the day. Not much is known about the actual reality of the conflict on the ground. Telephone and internet communications are still down in the region, with information from the government and the TPLF camp serving as the most visible source of information at this important juncture in the history of Ethiopia's 3.5-decade-long federalism. The more meaningful developments in the past week since the previous episode of RECAP Ethiopia was shot. One of the major developments of this week were the missile attacks carried out by the TPLF-led forces currently based in the Tigray region. Attacks concurrent to warnings by Getachew Reda, advisor to the president of the Tigray regional state, on airbase being used to coordinate airstrikes against Mekelle and other parts of the Tigray region, took place in the past week. On Saturday evening, November 14, the Azezo town in western Gondar, where the 33rd Regiment of the Ethiopian Military Base and the Aze Theodros Airport are located, were attacked by missiles, allegedly killing 6 commandos, according to eyewitnesses that told Addis Zeybe about the scene of the attack. The commandos were said to be waiting to board a fighter jet when the attack took place. The other city in the Amhara regional state that was attacked by missiles was Bahir Dar. The TPLF took responsibilities for both attacks. However, the most notable of the missile attacks carried out by the TPLF was the one that targeted Asmara's airport area, in what many dubbed as the escalation of non-international armed conflict into an international one. On Saturday, November 14, 3 missiles strikes around the Asmara International Airport were carried out to the shock of the international community, spectating the conflict. Prior warnings were made by the TPLF before the attacks were carried out in Eritrea. The Eritrean government responded, saying it will not react to the attack by the TPLF, even though it had said in a statement earlier that it was ready to answer the call from Addis, should such a call come in. In response to the airstrike on Eritrea, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo condemned the attack on Eritrea by the TPLF, saying, We are deeply concerned by this blatant attempt by the TPLF to cause regional instability by expanding its conflict with Ethiopian authorities to neighboring countries. The US Secretary of State also called for the de-escalation by both parties to the conflict, asserting that civilians, including US citizens, must be accorded due protection as the fight between two forces continues. From the headquarters in the Arat Kilo Palace on Sunday, a call was sent out to all members of the Tigray Special Forces and the Tigray militia to cease fire and surrender to the Ethiopian military. The Prime Minister announced on November 15 that within the next 3 days, this being between Sunday, November 14 and Tuesday, November 17, any members of the Tigray forces can answer this call with their safety being guaranteed. The deadline for the above call ended on Tuesday as the Prime Minister assured the people of Ethiopia that the next steps of the operation will be swift. Another important step taken by the Ethiopian government based in Addis was the appointment of Dr. Mulu Nagga, who became the chief executive of the Tigray Regional State on Friday, November 13, in accordance with the decision of the House of People's Representatives concerning the provisional administration of the Tigray National Regional State. The chief executive is expected to appoint heads in different executive organs, which will be selected from political parties peacefully operating in the region. In addition to this, on Tuesday, the government announced that the funds of 34 TPLF-associated businesses have been frozen amid the conflict in the region. Companies with frozen funds include Sur Construction, Guna Businesses, Trans Ethiopia, Mesfin Industrial Engineering, Hello Public Transport Association, Mega Printing, and Effort. The decision was passed by the Attorney General's office. Another major theme of the week included diplomatic visits to major East African countries like Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, and Congo in an effort to give clarity on the conflict currently ensuing in the northern region of the country by newly appointed Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Dammaqe Mokonnin. On the other hand, allegations against WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom, which said he is using his position at the UN agency to salvage diplomatic and other forms of support for the TPLF, was part of the week's happenings. Dr. Tedros, who is among the key figures in the TPLF's 3 decades rule, was accused of using his position in an unprofessional and illegal manner this week following a confidential statement by a source from within the WHO to the news outlet Anadolu. Dr. Tedros was appointed to the Director General position in May 2017 after nomination by the Ethiopian government, making him the first African to head the institution. The Director General's 5-year term is due to end in May 2022, roughly in a year and a half time. Dr. Tedros Adhanom is set to feature in the Bloomberg New Economy Forum between November 19 and 22, along with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. However, the main story of this week is about the increasing humanitarian concerns and the debate around the body of law that should be applied in the circumstances in the north. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, the UNHCR, the ICRC, and other humanitarian agencies have sounded alarm over the humanitarian situation at the region as a growing number of Tigrayans flee the region and country towards the neighboring country, Sudan. Concerns related to humanitarian access, safety of aid workers, identification of non-combatants, and other issues have been the cornerstone of many discourses this week. To start with the humanitarian impact of the conflict, the UN Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights said in Situation Update issued on November 17 that over 27,000 Tigrayan refugees have arrived at the Sudanese border since the conflict started, with the daily average being around 4,000 asylum seekers, with the main entry points being including in Hamdayat with over 15,700 people, Lugdi with over 9,500 people, and Abdurrafi with at least 98 people. This surpasses the initial number the UNHCR had anticipated, which was a total of 20,000 people crossing the Sudanese borders in 1 month. Capturing the severity of the situation at the moment, the Office of the High Commissioner said, "The humanitarian impact of the ongoing conflict between federal and Tigray regional forces is increasing as the days progress. Several hundreds of the people are reported displaced in Tigray fleeing conflict. The displaced population has reportedly moved towards the Shire and other locations further inland. The Regional Early Warning Directorate and the local NGO REST are currently on location conducting an assessment to estimate the magnitude of the displacement and the extent of humanitarian needs. Results of the assessment will be made public in due course. More displacements are expected. The above report also indicated that due to the closure of banks in the entirety of the Tigray regional state, a general shortage in the flow of money in the regional state is observed since the onset of the conflict. This in turn is said to have increased the humanitarian situation in the region because of the increasing inability of citizens to access goods and services necessary for day-to-day existence. In another report, the High Commissioner's Office had also raised concerns over the 96,000 plus Eritrean refugees currently in the region. The office said that it had moved thousands of refugees from the Shemel Bera refugee to the Hisanet refugee camp as the conflict grew near such camps, compromising the safety of these refugees. Let's now talk more about the legal aspects of the above issue. Even though policing conflicts for the collective safety of those that are not parties to the conflict in itself is a tremendous challenge, it seems to have become more imperative to do so in the current circumstances of the country. International law dictates that human rights provisions are applicable at all times, even at war times. However, jurisprudence also dictates that international humanitarian law, a more specialized body of law to govern situations of war and conflict, supersedes principles within human rights law due to the unique circumstances of situations of armed conflict. Within it, IHL includes key provisions guaranteeing the safety of citizens, aid workers, and non-military infrastructures. But as it is applicable in select cases stipulated by the relevant Geneva Conventions, the first step before unlocking the protection afforded by IHL is defining the nature of the conflict. In other words, answering the question, is this an armed conflict, is key before any discussion is held on the matter. After that, the issue of it being an international or non-international armed conflict takes center stage. So does the current situation of the country fall under the above categories, or is it a military operation to restore the rule of law? To answer this question, it is important to grasp international humanitarian law. In doing so, the first thing to take note of is that the region of law is not one of the easiest to apply. Because of the covert and unpredictable nature of the armed conflict, it is almost always difficult to identify the nature of conflict, which in turn makes it difficult to apply these provisions. According to Sylvian Veit, a former legal advisor to the legal division of ICRC, determining which category a conflict falls in is a serious issue. In her 2009 paper titled Typology of Armed Conflicts in International Humanitarian Law, Legal Concepts and Actual Situations, she says, while it is true that the relevant conventions refer to various types of armed conflict and therefore afford a glimpse of the legal outlines of this multifaceted concept, these instruments do not propose criteria that are precise enough to determine the content of those categories unequivocally. According to Harvard University, IHL has three primary sources. These are treaties, customary international law, and general principles adopted over the years. The first recognized codification of customary laws of land warfare was the 1863 Labor Code. Other important early formulations of IHL include the 1863 Geneva Convention, the 1868 St. Petersburg Declaration, the 1874 Brussels Declaration, and the 1880 Oxford Manual. And when talking about modern IHL, we find the 4 Geneva Conventions and 2 additional protocols to this convention. These conventions, specifically the 4th Geneva Convention on Protection of Civilians, Common Article 3 and Additional Protocol 3, are of immense importance in the current conflict taking place in Ethiopia. The categorization of the conflict is key to answering issues related to humanitarian access, treatment of civilians and civilian elements, as well as the protection of aid workers active in the region. However, as the government continues to refuse to call the conflict an armed one, sticking to the narrative of a military operation to restore the rule of law, determining the category of the current conflict within international humanitarian law has been difficult. With words such as mafia group, junta, and criminal group dominating public speeches by military and diplomatic officials, and the mainstream media. Compounding this, clarity on the applicable regime of law has not been possible during the current conflict.